and the third presentation by Ghada Ghazal on Gulen's hermeneutical approach versus Western Qur'anic approaches under the overall session theme of Hizmet's responses to contemporary challenges, a postmodern perspective. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody, and assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon all of you. And thank you for this opportunity. My research is concerned with Hocaefendi Gülen and Fethullah Gülen hermeneutical approach versus Western Qur'anic approaches. So the last 2 centuries witnessed like the emergence of new attitudes or approaches among contemporary intellectuals to understand and to give like new interpretation to the Quran. So my research focuses on Fethullah Gülen's rereading of the Quran text and his approach that focuses on thematic unity among the chapters or verses or surahs of the Quran, and to compare this approach with the contemporary Western Quranic approaches. So first of all, Gülen points out that the universe is the universe of God and what it's called in Arabic, Kainatullah, and that the Quran is the book of God, which is Kitabullah, and human beings are the servant of God, which is Ibadullah. And one of the common themes among these 3 entities is God or Allah, who manifested himself in the Quran. So the attributes of God can only be known fully through Quran, which is the eternal speech of God or the eternal word of God. Nonetheless, Fethullah Gülen notes that God's speech is different from the human speech, and the human beings are not able to comprehend all dimensions of this speech. So following the Maturidi school of thought, Gülen highlights the concept of inner speech, which is called kalam al-nafsi, and outer speech, which is kalam al-lafzi. So Gülen considers the inner meaning, which is embedded in the letters and words of the Quran, as essential. He also puts great emphasis on the incomprehensible nature of this meaning. So according to Gülen's approach, there are 3 levels of meaning in the Quran. First, it's the lafzi meaning, which is the literal meaning. And then there is the aqli meaning, to understand some realities in the text intellectually. And then there is dhawqi meaning, which goes beyond the text, so to understand and to express or the taste of the meaning. So with regard to Gülen's approach to Quranic exegesis, Gülen also uses 2 important Quranic concepts to present the distinct nature of the Quranic revelation. He used the term furqan, which signifies the difference, the uniqueness, and exceptional status of the Quran. And also he used the term qarin, which means the close one. And this term identifies the relationship between God and human beings through the Quran. So now also, like, I am more concerned about the notion that used by Fethullah Gülen, which is the notion of tanasub, and which comes forward in the modern exegesis with the Muslims and non-Muslims scholars. So the notion of tanasub, it means the harmony among the verses and chapters of the Quran. So bearing in mind that the Quran was revealed over a period of 23 years, some scholars have questioned the existence of this harmony or tanasub among the verses and chapters in the Quran, while others have praised it as an important device to understand the Quranic text. Western criticism of Quranic text from the point of thematic and chronological order in particular have recently encouraged a great number or some number of modern scholars whether Muslims or non-Muslims, to look at this issue in detail. So according to classical exegesis or mufassirin, the tanasub or the harmony among the verses and chapter of the Quran is a prestigious science in the Quranic exegesis or in the Quranic interpretation. And this is referred usually in the works of the classicals, mufassirin, as Nazm al-Quran or Nizam al-Quran. And we have several scholars of tafsir who identify this coherence as a significant feature of the Quran. Among these scholars, we can mention al-Tabari in his Jami' al-Bayan fi Tafsir al-Quran. We have Fakhruddin al-Razi in al-Tafsir al-Kabir, and he states that أكثر لطائف القرآن موضوعة في الترتيب والروابط, which means most of the subtleties of the Quran are in the links and relationships between the Quranic verses. We have also other scholars like al-Bayqai in his Nizam al-Durar fi Tanasub al-Ayat was-Suwar, and which also he shows this relationship. And we have many other scholars. And we have also this science has appeared in a number of works which deals with balagha or the eloquence of the Quran. And we can mention al-Khattabi and al-Bayqalani and al-Jurjani, who deals with the nazm of the Quran, working on the relationship between words and meaning. Now, coming to Fethullah Gülen's approach, he uses this device and he mentioned in his article entitled Eternal Music, he explained why he concentrates on the notion of tanasub, saying, I'm quoting him, the Quranic verses and chapters are not collected randomly. They are arranged according to divine order, tawqifi. And while explaining the relationship between, for example, the opening chapter and the following chapter of the Quran, Fethullah Gülen's state, quotation, the relationship between Surah Al-Fatiha and other surahs is very interesting. On the one hand, Fatiha stands in the Quran like a lonely star in the sky which has no connection with other stars and planets. On the other hand, it looks like a sun which has a strong relationship with the other stars and planets. Stars look like Quranic chapters and verses because one of the meanings of the verses of the Quran is najm, star. Like the stars of the sky which have close but different relationships among them, Quranic verses have also very strong but at the same time different connections with each other. So Gülen focuses not only on the relationship between verses and chapters, but also on the relationship between words and letters. In addition, he sometimes gives detailed information about the endings of the verses that are called fawasil. So the application of this rhetorical analysis to the Quran demonstrates that the sacred text utilizes the literary rules known at the time of the revelation. And the Quran expresses itself according to the mental and literary categories which were familiar at the time of revelation. And among the Western scholars, we have Mary Douglas investigated in particular the ring composition in diverse culture of the antiquity of the Oriental Mediterranean Sea, showing it as a very widespread mode of expression in that era. And biblical studies have undertaken the most detailed analysis of this form of rhetoric, but recent research reveals that it long predates the Bible. Now, moving to the Western approaches, we have many scholars that deals with this new approach to Quran, and I'm focusing here on Michael Kivers. And we know, along the majority of scholars who adhere to the historical and the critical method, which deconstruct the text to understand its historical origin in a diachronic perspective, We have nowadays other scholars taking up a synchronical viewpoint and pose the question of the coherence and the composition of the Quran. So instead of assuming in the Western academia an incoherent case or an incoherent text, the Quran made up of independent fragments, they start with the inverse hypothesis of a coherent text, the various parts of which are organically connected. So following a system developed by Roland Mayent for the study of the Bible according to Semitic rhetoric, Kuipers, for example, and his rhetorical analysis of the Quran surahs aim at answering the question whether the different fragments which make the Quran arranged according to a certain internal logic which brings coherence and unity, that is, a greater intelligibility to the text. So Kuipers identifies various layers within the surahs of the Quran. He divides the surahs into sections and subsections, sections and sequences and subsequences and sequences into passages. These passages are then broken into part, piece, segment, and finally member. So the main questions of this paper, what is the difference or what is the similarity between Gulen's rereading of the Quran or approach and that of the Western approaches? The hierarchical structure of the Western approaches presented here through the example of Kuipers from smaller levels to greater levels shows that the Quran is organized with rigid mathematical precision where every unit of the text plays a certain role on the textual level. So Kuipers' method reflects that analysis from macro to micro may lead to an artificial understanding, and that the only appropriate way to achieve an authentic understanding of the text is to begin at the inferior textual levels. So Western rhetorical analysis may open new perspectives for the interpretation of the Quran, especially with regard to the Christian-Muslim relation and other religion in the Western academia studies. With regard to Gulen, his excuses can be summarized as follows, quoting, excuses for Fethullah Gülen, excuses is produced in order to understand the text. From the Quranic perspective, this task is carried out via linguistic and literary analysis together with intertextuality, prophetic traditions, and exegetical reports. In addition to all of these, one also needs the light of the heart and the mind in the interpretation of the Quran. If the scholar places stress on historical analysis, it's described as traditional, riwayah. If priority is given to linguistic analysis, it's called rational exegesis, which is dirayah. So in his exegesis, Fethullah Gülen tries to keep this balance between the dirayah and riwayah. And he discusses the classical scholars, or he used the methodology of the classical scholars who used these methods as At-Tabari, Samarqandi, Zamarkashi, Razi, Baydawi, Ibn Kathir, Suyuti, Alusi, and others. So for Gulen, his methodology that the Quran has great authority in forming Muslim society and in defining the relationship between God and the creation, and as a consequence, the relation between human beings and the universe. So the essence of Quran structure is about communication and connection, and this connection should be strong that it finds a way to express itself in individuals' actions. So what Gulen is trying to do is rereading the Quran with an alternative kind of hermeneutics, and that is to emphasize the ultimate aim and goal and ends, which are concerned with doing of peace and the whole trajectory of a human development. Thank you.